All right. Hello, everyone. It's 1 o'clock, so let's get started. You are in the Enhancing Quality Measurement, Understanding DAV Certification in the Future Reporting with NCQA panel. WISHIN has been involved with NCQA's DAV certification program since 2020, and we hope that this panel discussion can help to provide some insights into what the program is, how it works, and where it's going into the future. Today we have two panelists who are going to be helping us describe all of that. The first is Wendy Talbot, who is the Vice President of Measurement and Data Operations with NCQA, and Laura Widder, who is WISHIN's own project director. We do have a slight have had a slight panelist change because the third panelist, Daryl Landvatter, with Network Health, came down with an illness yesterday and is unable to attend. So we're going to ask Wendy and Laura to channel their inner Daryl as they make their remarks today. Another housekeeping note, if folks have questions throughout the panel discussion, I think we'd encourage you just to raise your hand and ask them. There'll be a microphone going around. I think we'd like this to be an engaged discussion, so please do that if the mood strikes you. So why don't we get started? And Wendy, I think I'll start with you. Could you, first maybe just give a brief introduction of yourself, and then spend a few minutes talking about NCQA broadly, but also what the genesis of the DAV program was, and what it is, and what sort of the state of the program looks like today.
Hi, I'm Wendy Talbot, the Vice President of Measure Data Operations at NCQA. I've been with NCQA about 11 years, and most recently in this role probably since about March. Prior to that, I was really focused in the HEDIS audit space. So the health plan HEDIS audit kind of fell underneath my purview. Now that scope has increased to really all things kind of HEDIS Volume 2, so that publication with all the measure specs, through kind of the release of our Quality Compass health plan ratings. And so that includes our validation program, audit, data collection, certification of measure logic, all of that kind of falls underneath my team's responsibilities. Prior to coming to NCQA, I was a HEDIS auditor. I worked at an external quality review organization, doing a lot of work in the Medicaid space, performance measurement compliance, but spent a good majority of my time doing HEDIS health plan audits. And then prior to that, I was an epidemiologist at the Department of Health Services in Phoenix, where I live. So it's nice to be here at the conference today. A little bit about NCQA, the National Committee for Quality Assurance. For those who don't know, it's a not-for-profit organization who's really focused on, as in the name, quality, and kind of looking at ways to improve and encourage quality kind of in the healthcare space across the United States. So most of our familiar flagship products are health plan accreditation, obviously HEDIS reporting, but we also do a lot in the public policy space, as well as other recognition programs in the space of diabetes, case management, patient-centered medical home, and are really kind of starting to move more into the world of digital. We'll talk about that more at the end, kind of in terms of where NCQA is heading in the future. So with that, I think it's how did DAV, the Data Aggregator Validation Program, kind of come to be? And from it really kind of developed. So back in 2019, probably summer 2019, for those of you that are familiar with the health plan audit and make use of supplemental data for reporting, anything that's considered non-standard supplemental data has to go through a more rigorous audit that includes what we call primary source verification. So taking the data source or the file that you have and tracing that back to where the data originated, which is the EHR, the medical record, and securing the documentation to support what's in the output file. So it's a lot of work to take on as a health plan when you have kind of that direct relationship with the provider where the data resonates, but even tougher when you're getting that data from an HIE or some sort of data intermediary who now has aggregated those data or collected them from many sources, and you as the payer are now responsible to go support the proof of service audit. So we were approached with an opportunity to see how we could develop a program to take on the validation kind of that middleman, that data intermediary, to help alleviate the burden of that primary source verification at the health plan. So we took some components of the health plan audit, primarily around the supplemental data standards, and developed DAV, which includes kind of a three-part review. So there's a component of it that's standard, so similar to the health plan audit. You do go through a completion of a survey, so similar to the HEDIS roadmap. There's a validation assessment tool that the entities have to complete, which speak everywhere from onboarding, so which would talk about how they're getting data from a site. So whether it's a lab or a hospital or a clinic, so they have to address kind of how do they onboard or start that engagement with receiving data, all the way through kind of managing it, any transformation, cleaning, anything they're doing to those data, and then as well as how are they storing it, and then how do they outbound that. And so kind of watching that and following that from end to end. I'm looking at policies and procedures, doing demonstrations. So it usually consists of probably a day and a half type audit that a health plan would undergo, as well as the two other components are what we call output data conformance. And that kind of looks at how the data files conform. And I'm actually getting ahead of myself. That's on another slide. So I'm going to speak to this one here, and we'll go back to more of the details in the program in the next thing. So DAV was developed as more of a, hey, let's help to streamline this process, right? So how can we more expeditiously offer a validation that's not directly tied to the health plan audit, to offer this for entities like WISHIN and others. So to date, these are the numbers up on the slide here. There's about 20 states that are represented across organizations that have gone or are currently going through DAV. We cover about 19 plus million lives have gone through or have data that have been validated through the system. 46,000 plus data sources. And so when we talk about data sources, these are feeds from like an EHR feed, a lab site, something of that nature. We have 10 data partners that are certified or seeking certification. And so what a data partner is, WISHIN actually works with one. So it's KPI, powered by Health Catalyst, who is their data partner. So they help with some of the standards. So we have 10 data partners and then 35 responsible parties, which WISHIN is a responsible party. They're the one who actually received the validation and can share those data. So that's kind of a nutshell of how we came to be, and there'll be more to come.
Great, thanks, Wendy. Okay, Laura, could you briefly introduce yourself? I'm sure many people in the room are familiar with you, but also then talk a little bit about the history of WISHIN's involvement with DAV, and an overview of how the program works for the WISHIN DAV participants today.
Sure. Hi, I'm Laura Widder. I am the project director for WISHIN. So I've been with WISHIN for about, a little over 11 years as an employee, and a year and a half before that as a consultant. I oversee all of our project work, all of our implementations, any of the, work that's going to be done to expand WISHIN. That's our team. I have a team of implementation specialists that I work with. And we also were the group that worked through the DAV process and worked with all the healthcare organizations that were part of our cohorts or part of our certification. So with WISHIN was, we were in like cohort 1, I believe. Yes, we were one of the first HIEs to go through this process, because we found that we were hoping it would have great benefit to both the payer organizations, because they have to reach out to one organization or a lot fewer organizations to get their data for quality reporting, and it also would benefit the healthcare systems, because then they don't have to provide all of those detailed charts and all of that information. WISHIN will take care of that for them. So we saw a great opportunity, and we went through the process that Wendy was talking about. First, we went through the VAT, which she mentioned, which is basically validating our processes, our security, how we receive the data, what happens with the data when it's in our system, how it's stored, what kind of transformations, if any, how kind of mapping, and all of our policies. So we had to answer quite a bit of questionnaires, provide quite a bit of documentation about all of our processes. And then we went through with our partner, our data partner. They provided the output data, or the format and the structure of the type of data that we would output. and making sure that it conformed to NCQA standards. So that was the next piece. Then came the primary source verification, where my team reached out to everybody, all of the organizations that we would be working with, asking them for copies of EHR records for specific encounters so that we could show to the auditors that were working on this, so we could show them that the data that we are outputting matches the data that's in the EHR exactly. So it would be exactly the same as what the actual EHR system would be sending to the payer organizations. And that also we were still conforming to the standards of how we output that data and the format and structure of that data. And so we went through that process. So, you know, when we go through these cohorts, the implementation team will be reaching out to healthcare systems that we want to get certified. They get certified in different ways, different workflows. So basically usually you have your hospital inpatient. That is one workflow, or what they call a cluster. And if they have a like EHR system, so like we'll have an Epic outpatient cluster, or Epic inpatient cluster, a Meditech inpatient cluster, a Meditech outpatient cluster. They get grouped into, so we don't have to provide data for every single organization because they're all kind of similar. So NCQA groups them into similar clusters. So we don't have to provide data for every single organization that we're certifying, but a good representation of them. And then we also have diagnostic clusters as well. And they're usually grouped by EHR system, outpatient, inpatient workflows. So once we have the clusters all figured out, then we will reach out to the healthcare organizations. We get a list of, here's pretty much your date range you have to pick. You pick like your 60th encounter on that day and go get the records for that specific encounter. So it's very random as to what we ask for. And as it should be, because if you want to validate the data, it has to be random selection. So it's so then we work with your organization. We get a few examples. We work through them, validate that we're getting the full medical record and making sure that our output is the same as the medical record, and then submit it for the audit. So that process does take a while, and we reach out to the organizations. Usually the validation lasts for 2 years, which makes me very happy that it's not every year anymore. But and so, you know, we'll be reaching out to organizations as we want to certify even more new organizations, and we will have to renew our certification on a regular basis. Now it's a 2-year basis, which is great. I went long, but
That's okay. So, Wendy, Laura just did a great job of, I think, describing a lot of the pieces of the process. Anything you want to elaborate on from NCQA's perspective?
Yeah, so I did have them flip this slide up because it kind of gives a visual of kind of what it looks like. And so one thing I did want to stress is that the DAV program is measure agnostic. So while these data can be used to contribute to HEDIS reporting, they're not validated to say, is this a numerator hit? Is this a valid exclusion? It's validated to ensure that what is in the data that you would receive actually matches what was in the source. And so from there, the assumption is the determination of a valid exclusion or a valid numerator hit would come by going through the logic or the next steps there. Unlike if you're going through probably supplemental data validation with your auditor, it's a little closer to home. That source may be specific to a measure. They may be looking more specific to more specifications. So is this mammogram valid based on the HEDIS specifications? We can at times, and I'm sure Laura can speak to it, when we are doing the primary source verification as part of DAV, we keep the specs in mind, right? We keep HEDIS in mind. It is an NCQA program, but we know that these data, while supplemental data is a HEDIS term and having to get them audited, that the data will also be used in other places. So the thought being is that if we are validating them for all use cases and not just a HEDIS use case, then it makes it a little bit more robust of a data file to receive. So as she spoke, again, different things too, is because there's so much of these data. If we were to look at every single piece of it, it would take forever. It would never get done. There'd be no reduction in burden. So that's where we landed on kind of this clustering methodology with like sources, like EHR feeds. And it's a win-lose too, right? So you get the benefit for all if they pass, but you also kind of take the loss if they don't. And so because it is random, it's kind of the luck of that 60th case, and that 60th case may fail, but the 61st may have passed. And so we are really, mindful of that. So there's committees that meet to discuss kind of how a determination is made. So it is kind of serious because there's a lot of data that fall into what passes and what's failed. So we want to be mindful of that.
Thanks. And Laura, I think you were leading into this a little bit. Could you talk a little bit about, what steps WISHIN takes to ensure data validity and data accuracy, and how that aligns with a lot of what Wendy was just talking about related to the DAV program?
As many of you may know who have been implementing or implemented WISHIN or implemented your interfaces with WISHIN, part of that implementation process, of course, is testing. I mean, that's the first thing we do. We do a lot of testing with your organization, making sure all of the data that you're sending us is properly populated, properly represented. Usually in the implementation process, we'll ask you to have some business analysts on hand who can compare our system to your system, making sure that everything is displaying exactly as it should be. We have also put in place, which we will be implementing very soon. We're still in that transitional state for 2.0. But we will be implementing a process now to do primary source verification, PSV, on a regular basis. So not just for DAV, but on a regular basis to ensure the continuous quality and completeness of the data. So we will be working with organizations. We're going to be putting them on a schedule. And twice a year, we'll ask them for some medical records for visits and things like that so that we can do that process even outside of the DAV cycle, just to make sure that everything stays as quality data. We're also putting together some reporting that in 2.0 we'll have a lot more access to that, but we have some reports available. I do some reporting to look at data completeness, to look at different types of things to make sure that we are receiving what we are supposed to be receiving. We also have a data governance committee that was formed as one of the recommendations from the auditors through our first cohort, which is going to work with us to prioritize ways that we can make the data more standardized, ways that we can recommend organizations add more data to be more data completeness. Should we be using all standardized codes? Should we allow internal lab codes? Should we only use LOINC codes? Things like that. We're going to be working with our data governance committee. They'll also be reviewing reports that we put out as far as what kind of data we're receiving to look at, what is our completeness? Where should we focus on, in gaps? Let's see, what else was I going to say? I think, and also when we start new implementations now, one of the processes we're going to do for new implementations is, again, the primary source verification will be the last step. After we've done all the testing, after we've moved into production, we will do a primary source verification again to pick some random encounters and make sure that what's in your EHR is what is in our system and that the output matches. And we will be doing that for any new implementation or if there's any major change to an implementation. So if you change EHR vendors, we'll do a PSV after we're done testing and implementing it, just to make sure that we are still in a really good place as far as data quality and completeness.
There you go.
Laura, I thank you for stating that you would work with the health systems to make sure that you're again having this cohort to make sure that you're getting the data needed. Are ECDS measures in mind when you guys are speaking to the health systems, right? Because the shift to those those reporting mechanisms, also include exclusions, and we will no longer have hybrid measures to be able to do chart chases with. So, right, like, again, these are very important topics that we're already discussing within our organization. So just want to make sure that the cohort has that in mind as you are discussing enhancements and making sure that that data is being received.
We do have payer representation, health plan representation on the data governance committee. So hopefully as we do our prioritization, as we do our reviews of data and things, that they are bringing that to light in that data governance committee. I'm hoping that will be the forum for that. But any payer organization that is a WISHIN member, if they want to bring things like that to our attention, please reach out. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what you're interested in. We want to hear what information you may still need that we might not have. We may want to know what to focus on. We are very open. We want to know exactly what you want us to look for. So please come tell us, reach out to us, and we'll.
Can I add to that too?
Yep.
And to that, so we're going to just kind of blow this all out of the water. From that, because one of the later ones was kind of where's the future, like where's DAV headed, those things. And so as we obviously kind of have the pulse of HEDIS measures and kind of how they're changing and evolving, we too are looking at the DAV. So one of the components is the, you conform to our implementation guide, right? So that CCD implementation guide, which when we originally built it, we built it really on kind of the core HEDIS measures and the components of those measures that would be used. So your procedures, your diagnosis, your things. So we are reevaluating that and continue to expand that to include other measures too. So if you think about, one of the areas that we're in right now is looking to how do we incorporate like social needs type data that aren't flowing directly through like an EHR feed. So we're talking to some participants who have gone through DAV to see, okay, how are you collecting these? How would we support it? What would that look like? Because we want to make sure that it's staying relevant to use the data as hybrid's going away, as more measures are moving kind of more to that clinical space, but not quite those clinical services that are going to be coded directly. So we're staying on top of that as well.
Okay, so let's change gears a little bit, Wendy. We'll go to you again. Okay. And this is back to the channeling Daryl portion of the panel. So I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit about at least the feedback you've received at NCQA? What impact has DAV reporting had on health plan measure results as part of this program?
Yeah, so the program went live officially July 2020, right? So it's been 4 years now. And so it's always one of those, we had a good cohort of entities going through. And in that first year, because we do have them kind of come back and report to us kind of covered lives, like what kind of data did you share? Very little in the first year, right? Because there's that idea of trust and who wants to take it and who's going to be the first, and I want them to take it before I'll take it. So over the last 4 years, we've really seen a large increase in payers connecting to take validated data through the DAV program. We are seeing probably the most, and this is where Daryl would have had the data, but we're seeing the most contributions, as you can imagine, to spaces in your labs. So your A1Cs, your mammograms, things from like radiology clinics, immunizations, well visits. And so we are hearing from the auditors, one, there's a lot more DAV sources coming through, identified through the roadmap. It's part of the audit. But from the rates that we're seeing, because we'll ask, we can't at NCQA clearly delineate that out. I don't know if a supplemental data source is internal or DAV. But what we're hearing is that they are looking kind of on average, sometimes it's contributing, 10-ish points or so, depending on the measure. So we are starting to see a lot more reliance on it, particularly as the message of we are trying to move away from hybrid, trying to move away from relying on the charts. While we know that's likely not going to happen completely, not being able to chase on a sample, if you think about what hybrid means, it's really going after that 411. You can still go after the chart, but when you're doing that on a whole eligible population, it's actually quite insurmountable. So we are, hoping to collect more data to find out really where those true impacts are. But we're starting to see it. So 4 years into the program, it's a lot of positive information.
Great. So Laura, earlier you sort of alluded to the fact that this program really benefits providers as well as the health plans. I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more about how DAV has helped foster some collaborations between the plans, the health systems, and HIE like WISHIN, and what have been some of the both benefits and challenges of this collaboration?
Well, of course, some of the benefits first. That's the easy one. Again, we have payer organizations who are providing their members that they need to do HEDIS audits on or need quality data for. We output all of the data, and it greatly reduces their chart chase. They go to WISHIN instead of going to 30 different organizations. Now, granted, they still may have to do some of it for other organizations that aren't certified or that aren't part of WISHIN, but it helps reduce that burden on the payers having to chase down that data. It also helps the health systems because they are not having to provide all of those records all the time. So we've been seeing that, and I'm trying to channel my Daryl, but I'm not good at channeling. So, but we have had positive feedback on both sides regarding that it's been helping them. And it also helps benefit WISHIN because going through this process helps us make sure that we are keeping that data, making sure that we are providing that data quality measures. We are adhering to higher quality standards. We are doing a lot more validation on the data and a lot more frequently, which benefits everybody. Just ensuring that the data stays at that high quality and completeness level. Challenges? So, some of the challenges we've had is this is a new process. It's a new process for everybody. So it is a learning process. Some of the challenges that I've seen, one is the output of the data. Now, we do conform to the standards that are given to us for the data output. So there's certain format the data has to be in. That may not be readily, quickly, easily compatible with the system that the payer has to use to import it. So there's a lot of mapping that has to go on, a lot of discussions, a lot of questions. And that's also the sheer volume of the data that we produce. It's a lot of data. Those files that we produce, those CCDAs and the CSV files, they're huge. So there's been some, a lot of challenges just making sure that, and the payers come back with questions about specific data elements, doing some mapping for them, helping them being able to ingest it into their own system. So those have been some of the challenges. And it is a learning process. We can do custom mapping services or custom help, customized help for importing the data. And let me think about some of the other challenges. One of the challenges might be responsiveness as well. The vast majority of healthcare systems, when we're doing the primary source validation, have been very responsive, very helpful. They want to reduce their burden too. So providing us with a few records now saves them from providing payer organizations with, stacks and stacks of records. So the vast majority of organizations have been very responsive when it comes to asking them for their outputs and things. But, healthcare organizations are busy. Everybody's busy. So sometimes, some healthcare organizations that we wanted to certify may not be as responsive as we were hoping for, or not be able to adhere to the timelines that we have to adhere to for the process. So some of that has been a challenge too. It's not that big of a challenge as just the output data and trying to make sure that it's, working well for the payers and being able to import it and that they're able to interpret it. I think that is probably our biggest challenge right now. And, we're all learning how to, also deliver it in a way that they can download it, because again, these volumes are huge. It's a lot of data. So that's one of the challenges is, getting it to you and having the payer organizations be able to import it in a very meaningful way.
And yeah, Wendy, I don't know if you had anything to add to that, sort of from a program perspective, what you're hearing.
Yeah, format's always been the format's been the challenge. When we started the program, we went down the path of wanting to have a standard format in which the data were being exchanged. Otherwise, you're kind of losing that ability to validate something into some standard. We went with CCDA. At the time, there had been an uptick in organizations trying to use them for reporting, and they kind of were defaulting to non-standard data. What we found out, though, was a lot of vendors, if you're using a vendor to report HEDIS, they don't take the CCDs, they don't use them, your systems aren't built to take them. So we have allowed, as Laura had mentioned, that ability to kind of map them or flatten them into a usable format, which we initially started thinking, okay, then that would have to be validated. So we did allow for some, if it's flattened, the auditor can make that decision. Still, I know not ideal because it's still challenging to then have to get it into that format. We have evolved the program. I'm not sure that this is going to be any easier, but we have moved to a FHIR option as well. So we do validation in FHIR. So that is an option for entities coming through the program. The challenge or the restriction with FHIR is that we do hold to the fact that it has to be exchanged in FHIR. Still really trying to stick to not allowing that to be flattened or mapped or translated back. So trying to really get towards more of a standard of data exchange. We don't have to date a lot of participants that are in the FHIR space. There have been some that have kind of dabbled in practicing, trying to conform to it and do PSV on it. I don't know that anyone's actually exchanging it in FHIR. I think additionally, a lot of the things, Laura, you probably could confirm, during the primary source verification, there's times, right? So you get caught as the person responsible for the data because you have it, right? And so if we find a discrepancy during that primary source verification and it can't be confirmed or explained through either mapping documentation or something else, that fails, and that subsequently could fail the site. And so the struggle is that, WISHIN or others that go through the program are like, but that's how we got the data. And so kind of the response is that, as we're trying to improve quality, somebody has to take responsibility for it. If you're exchanging those data under the guise of good quality data, then we don't want to facilitate knowingly sharing stuff. So that's a hard part too, because how do you then go back and kind of, you're not necessarily the one who has to go back and train the provider or train kind of that. So those are pain points, and we're struggling with it too, but really we can't kind of in good conscience let those things pass. And then just the volume, like we really have tried to reduce and really do minimal primary source verification. But even when an entity like WISHIN is still trying to go back to health systems and providers to really meet that, I don't know what your largest sample has been. Timing's tough. It's a 22-week program, which seems like a long time, but when you're in the crux of it, it does go by pretty quickly. So we are looking at ways to kind of help to streamline and facilitate that. We did implement, as WISHIN took advantage of that 24-month validation. So that allows you to go the 24 months without having to go through that standards review. So filling out that VAT, sitting across the desk from somebody, reviewing all that. And then offering some more rapid cycle type PSV, so you can just come through with the sources and support the primary source verification. So we continue to think of ways to try to align and kind of, more expeditiously get data through. Because we know as an HIE, you're not just signing people on the first Tuesday of the year and you don't do it again, right? It's every day, all day. So how do you continually keep those sites validated? So.
Perfect. So, and I think you're heading this direction. So could you talk a little bit about what the future of the program looks like and how it aligns with NCQA's broader, measurement strategy going forward?
Yes. Broader, everything, we're all moving towards a digital world and interoperability. And, Lisa talked this morning about TEFCA and all the things, right? Everyone's heading in that direction. So all of NCQA's HEDIS measures are moving digital. We're heading in that direction. And so with that, we know much more is being relied on using clinical data to report measures, right? So claims have always been the tried and true. as we're moving our measurement sets more towards looking at clinical systems and procedures and things, how can we help to further streamline a validation process? So trying to move away from manual, right? How can we do away with primary source verification and use more kind of automated approaches? How do we maybe use queries and other metrics to really drive into maybe those sites that maybe need a little bit more of a human touch rather than kind of more of an automated touch? So we're working internally to find ways to kind of solve those problems, brainstorm using automation and quality to determine those things. As I mentioned earlier, too, kind of keeping up with expanding the use cases. So when DAV started, we actually had put a pin in not including medication data. The main reason is that for HEDIS, you have to, most measures that use a pharmacy has to be dispensed, and that information wouldn't be at the HIE. And most health plans have a pretty robust PBM process and have those data. But we did find that they are showing up. They are there. And so we had to expand, not had to, but we expanded to include pharmacy. So we're continually evaluating the data that are flowing through to make sure that it's relevant, that we're keeping up with the needs of the data, the social determinants, kind of those things that aren't necessarily found tried and true in a code or things of that nature. So looking to evolve that. We added FHIR. Looking at other opportunities to expand DAV beyond just the HIE kind of data intermediaries. We figure still to this point, we do have health plans that come and say, hey, can we go through it? Right now, the stance is you have an audit process by which you can undergo an audit. So, but what other areas could we work to bring entities through that also have data to offer so that they too can get some sort of stamp of approval to ease your burden sitting across the table from your health plan auditor? We also talk with the auditors a lot. They're at our disposal to kind of feel the pain points that they know that you guys encounter, that they too encounter. So how do we kind of incorporate what they're sharing with us into either the DAV program or actually into the health plan audit itself? Those of you who are familiar with it, a lot of the 2024 audit materials came out a week or so ago. The roadmap's been, further refined. We're really trying to streamline that. So you're spending less time having to document and more time demonstrating, right? It's really kind of in the outcomes and less on the piece of paper. If you have a policy and procedure, that's great. But if there's nothing behind it to say we actually are doing it, then that's where you're going to run into problems. So kind of moving more outcomes based. At large, NCQA has a lot of projects and programs going on. How do we try to expand HEDIS beyond just your health plans and your payers, providers, health systems, things of that nature? And then really in the interoperability space, getting data moving, FHIR, moving DQMs, all the things. So lots going on at NCQA. Yes. She has a question.
So a couple questions. I think the first question is, does WISHIN intend to offer a FHIR option?
Eventually, we are looking into it. We're investigating it. It will have to wait until we move to our WISHIN 2.0 platform. FHIR is not available in our current platform, but when we move to 2.0, that is something we want to investigate. We want to investigate FHIR in a lot of different ways, but we will look at the HEDIS FHIR as well.
Okay, that was question number one. Question number two, from a use case standpoint, today we're not allowed to really leverage the WISHIN data for risk adjustment purposes, but from a health plan standpoint, right, that would produce a lot more ROI than perhaps some of the other uses that are permitted today. So wondering where WISHIN is at in that process of evaluating for risk adjustment utilization.
Correct. The use cases that are allowed for payer organizations, it's 4 use cases right now. We are working on business cases to add more use cases to our data sharing and participation agreement, and risk adjustment is one of them. So that is in progress. It has to go through approvals. We have a participant advisory board that will evaluate those use cases and approve them, and if they're approved, they get added to our data sharing and participation agreement. And then we also have organizations who have the opportunity to basically object to those. So there's a process, but risk adjustment is in that process right now. So we are working on it.
And then my last question, I promise, then I'll give up the microphone. I'm wondering how many payer organizations are in the room today. It's unfortunate the person from Network Health Plan isn't here to be able to speak directly to it, because I think they were probably one of your first organizations to actually contract with WISHIN for DAV. But I'm really interested in, the experiences of other DAV utilizers, and, if there is interest. I know right now WISHIN's focus seems to be on the data governance piece, which I understand. But I do think there would be value in a user group environment for DAV, so that we would be able to, leverage best practices. And since we're really focused on quality, and, managing our patient populations, hopefully there wouldn't be concerns about, antitrust or, competing entities working together in this way.
I think that's a wonderful idea. As WISHIN has been a very, very small organization. We've been pretty light on our staff, and what we've been able to accomplish with that group as far as outreach to our customers. But we've been adding outreach specialists. We've been adding new staff to kind of do some of that engagement. User forums, check-ins with various types of organizations and how they're using the system and how we can work together. So having a DAV user forum or a DAV user group is an awesome idea. So we're all putting that right here and making sure that we do something like that. But you were wondering if there are any other DAV subscriber organizations here in the room. Do we have any other ones in the room?
I don't think so.
Okay, sorry, but yes, a user group would be great. I think that's an awesome idea.
Great question, Shelley. Okay, so we have a few more minutes for other participant questions.
Okay, I'm Chris. I'm the board director or board chair for WISHIN, and I also am responsible for our accountable care work at Amplify Health, which is the Bell and Gunderson. I actually have a comment and a question with each hat. So with the board chair hat, I'm going to say thank you for what you're doing. I think this is what WISHIN should be doing. WISHIN should be taking the work that's happening at every single health system and every single payer and doing it once. The challenges you mentioned, I guess I'm going to shift to the Amplify hat now. The challenges you mentioned are the same challenges we experience. We have 10 different lab and supplemental data feeds that we send out today. And yeah, we want a standard file format, and sometimes that's accepted and other times it's not. And we have to work through that. We are now going through an EMR conversion that's going to come up that's going to require us to rewrite all of these interfaces. So we have a new option here, right, that we can use and that will minimize that burden and that pain and that cost and that redundancy, because we aren't the only people sending lab and supplemental data feeds. So I really appreciate that. And then the last question, which is a little off topic but very related, are these same lab and supplemental data fields moving back to our EMRs so that when we do our HEDIS calculations internally, we now have real-time data that helps us close gaps and HEDIS gaps rather than waiting 3 to 6 months for claims to show up?
At the moment, not, but let's talk about that idea.
Okay. So we got to write that down. That was the chair hat saying that.
Thank you.
Great questions. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending this session. I think we have a few extra minutes for break prior to the next session. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask us directly, we'll hang out for a few minutes. Otherwise, we think this is a really exciting program. We're investing a lot of energy into it, and NCQA is investing a lot of energy into making it better as well. So thank you very much.